presentation or that most of you can understand? The story that Yuri told us again today, I've been listening to stories like this for 10 years. I worked for Mining Watch Canada. We started in 1999, and we have for 10 years been listening to people from Latin America, Africa, and Asia Pacific tell the stories of the damages that are being done by Canadian mining companies in all of these places. And if anything positive can come out of my presentation today, it is that these stories are finally coming through in Canada and internationally. They're being heard. There are processes underway right now that are quite intense and quite focused, and that many of you can become involved in. So thank you to Catherine for outlining the international scene. I'll touch on it a little bit, but I'm going to focus on what's going on in Canada because it's so relevant to all of us, and to finally addressing some of these stories that keep coming up. So the last 5 years has seen an unprecedented intensity of focus on the negative social, economic, and environmental impacts that may be caused by extractive companies, but also on the lack of effective regulation and legal approaches to deal with these activities, to deal with these impacts. Particularly when companies operate in what we call weak governance zones, in places where these instruments, these legal instruments and regulatory instruments either don't exist or are inept, corrupt, ineffective. So this intensity is happening on two levels. It's happening at the international level, there's a real focus there, and it's happening in Canada. And that's quite unusual. Canada right now, believe it or not, is actually playing a leadership role in at least looking at the issues that our extractive companies are engaged in. So in Canada, all of this started really becoming intense in 2005. And in 2005, to make it very short, people like Yuri came to Canada, but from the Philippines. An indigenous person from the Philippines and a farmer, and came before a parliamentary committee called it was the subcommittee of the Standing Committee of Human Rights and International Trade at that time. And they told a story like Yuri's story of Goldcorp in Guatemala, but it was TVI Pacific in the Philippines. And I don't know what happened, but that committee had heard already over the years many stories like that one. And maybe it's just something happened that made the difference. Perhaps it was the fact that TVI Pacific, this company, threatened with legal action against the committee if they were to, if anything was said against them that they would consider slanderous. They also threatened Mining Watch Canada. This was the day before the testimony. Maybe it was that. So that committee decided that enough about always hearing these stories. They didn't want to hear more stories. They wanted to look at why is there no remedy for these people? Why do they have to come here to Canada, travel so far, and talk to parliamentarians? Why is there no remedy in Canada that's outside of just telling their story there? So that started a process of hearings, and I won't walk you through the whole thing. But it led to a final report, and it's just this small report in 2005 that came from that committee that has really changed the debate in Canada and is started in a really intense debate. I'll come back to that in a moment. So this was 2005. Then 2006, we had the corporate social responsibility roundtables. This was the government's response to the recommendations in this report. The government didn't want to follow these recommendations, but said, we'll have roundtables, we'll talk about it. Very Canadian. So how many of you know that this report came out in 2005, this parliamentary report? So not too many. How many of you know about the CSR roundtables that happened in 2006 and participated maybe? So maybe more. So momentum is building. I participated in the roundtables as an advisor on the advisory group, so it was my whole life in 2006. That's all I did. Then a final report came out of the roundtables. Now the reports are getting bigger. This is the final report from the roundtables, 2007. And I'm going to, again, I'll come back to this in a moment. So that's 2007. Then now, 2009, big action again. On the one hand, the government has finally responded to the recommendations in this report. But the other thing that happened this year is a private member's bill was brought forward by a member of parliament, again from that same parliamentary committee from 2005. Different person, but a member of parliament. And that private member's bill is the most amazing piece of proposed legislation that we could have possibly imagined. It would really make a big difference if that bill was passed. But of course, the industry is vehemently opposed to this bill. And it's a Liberal member of Parliament, John McKay, who put forward the bill, but the Liberal Party is divided. Because of course, the Liberal Party is the party that knows that one day it will rule again, and they would have to implement that bill. And so there's division now. Again, I'll come back to that. I'll come back to it in more detail. So this is what's been happening in Canada just in 5 years. Lots of action, lots of action. And civil society has been organizing around that action. So when the roundtable started, we created something called the Canadian Network on Corporate Accountability. And there are 20 organizations that are members of this Canadian Network on Corporate Accountability, including some from Quebec also, Entente Missionnaire, Rights and Democracy was a member, they just actually had to withdraw, unfortunately. Development and Peace is also a member. So this is what's happening in Canada. At the same time, while this was happening, the Ruggie process started. So 2005 again, Ruggie got started. So at the Canadian level, something's happening, and at the international level. And we've had a really good description of Ruggie's work, so I won't touch on it too much, but I do want to say something about Ruggie, and that's this issue of remedy. Ruggie's final report came out in 2008. He did his final report. He had a first mandate of 2 years, became almost 3 years, and then he did a report. And this is the report about protect, respect, and remedy. In that report, there's a quote that I keep bringing back because it's so remarkable to me to see someone working at the international level who's very highly respected, a huge international process that everyone is looking to. So, with your indulgence, I'm going to read to you this quote from Ruggie's report of 2008. He says, "The root cause of the business and human rights predicament today lies in the governance gaps created by globalization between the scope and the impact of economic forces and actors and the capacity of societies to manage their adverse consequences. These governance gaps provide the permissive environment for wrongful acts by companies of all kinds without adequate sanctioning and remedy. He says sanctioning and reparation, which is like remedy. How to narrow and ultimately bridge the gaps in relation to human rights is our fundamental challenge." What's interesting to me about that quote is that